This is Optimal Finance Daily, episode 1507. I bought a home at 22. It was one of the most rewarding financial decisions I've ever made. Part 2 by Jamila Souffrant of journeytolaunch.com. And I'm your host and personal finance enthusiast, Diana Merriam. This is the show where I read to you from some of the best personal finance blogs on the planet, sometimes a little too enthusiastically. But I can't help it. Money is an incredible resource that we can use to craft the life of our dreams. So thanks for joining me today and every day. Do you have a question you'd like answered here on the show? Go ahead and send it over to finance@oldpodcast.com and you will hear from me soon. Even if your question isn't answered on a Q&A episode, I do my very best to answer every email. Today's post is actually a continuation from yesterday. So if you're new here, it'd be best to listen to yesterday's episode first. But if you're all caught up, let's hear part 2 and continue optimizing your life. I bought a home at 22. It was one of the most rewarding financial decisions I've ever made. Part 2 by Jamila Souffrant of journeytolaunch.com. I learned how to weigh risk versus reward. When the excitement wore off and really hit, I quickly realized that I may have bitten off more than I could chew. Could I really afford this condo? I had used all my savings at the time, and I still needed to save an additional 10% for the rest of the down payment. I also needed enough to cover closing costs and to qualify for a mortgage in order to seal the deal. Luckily for me, the building wasn't set to be complete for another 2 years. The developers hadn't even broken ground yet when I put my deposit down. While it was nerve-wracking to have to wait another 2 years for the building to be complete, the additional time was exactly what I needed to save more money. Upon graduation, I was hired full-time by the company I interned for throughout college. It was reassuring to know that I would have a stable income to rely on once the building was complete. I was also able to live with my mom during that time, which helped me save money on rent. During these 2 years of the building's construction, I worked hard, lived below my means, and became even more of a super saver. I knew in the beginning of my working career that my paycheck would only be just enough to cover the mortgage. I also knew that I would earn more income over time, and eventually I'd be able to widen the gap between my income and living expenses. Until then, I planned to save as much as possible while the building was in construction. Ultimately, this experience with risk assessment helped prepare me for when I decided to take the leap and turn my side hustle into a full-time career. I learned how much representation matters. Growing up in Brooklyn, I knew a number of people, including my grandmother, who had the foresight to buy properties in neighborhoods like Fort Greene and Bed-Stuy in the 1980s and early 1990s, whose property values improved as crime rates decreased. When my grandmother bought a 3-family home pre-construction in the heart of Fort Greene, at the time she had no strategic plans to become a real estate investor. She just wanted a place to call her own, a piece of the American dream. But watching the neighborhood transform and seeing people build wealth through home ownership sparked my interest in real estate. If my grandmother, an immigrant who came to this country with nothing to her name and worked as a nanny, could find success in real estate, I figured I could too. Seeing that representation was invaluable because it inspired me and boosted my confidence to work toward my dreams of financial freedom when I was a young college grad and later when I made the shift to become my own boss. Representation is so important, and it was one of the things I saw lacking in the FIRE, which is Financial Independence Retire Early space, when I first started getting into personal finance. All the podcasts and a majority of the guests that I found or listened to at the time that talked about FIRE were often white men, and while I learned a lot from them, I knew that I wanted to hear from more diverse voices. I knew that if more people saw someone who looked like them or that they could relate to doing this, it would show them that it could be possible for them too, which drove me as I grew Journey to Launch. I learned that success is where preparation and luck meet. Looking back, it was a big risk to go into contract on the condo, but I knew the reward would be worth it. By the time construction was completed, my unit had appreciated almost 20% above the purchase price. I'd made money before I even moved in. So while I was taking on a huge risk with my income just barely being able to cover the mortgage, I was fairly confident that in the worst case scenario, I could sell or rent out the condo. Overall, buying a condo at such a young age taught me a lot. I was extremely lucky in many regards that it worked out in my favor. While everyone does not have the same tools or circumstances like I did that afforded me the opportunity to buy something at 22 years old, I do hope that sharing my story will help encourage others or that next young person to dream big and go after things that seem impossible. You just listened to part 2 of the post titled, I Bought a Home at 22. It was one of the most rewarding financial decisions I've ever made, by Jamila Souffrant of JourneyToLaunch.com. Like Jamila, I've found that a defined time frame for reaching a financial goal can help give us the push we need to make it happen. She had 2 years to save the money she needed for the condo. In the grand scheme of things, that isn't a lot of time. I like how Jamila used the time she had to get really good at living below her means. That is a skill set that is going to serve her for the rest of her life. As demonstrated in her story, by challenging herself with one financial goal, she increased her capacity to take on even bigger challenges like being her own boss. I experienced something similar when I got out of 30 grand of debt in 11 months. I proved to myself that I could do hard things, and the satisfaction I got from that drove me to do other hard things, like walk the Camino, which is a 500-mile trek across northern Spain, become a homeowner, and fund my own business. I also love Jamila's points about representation. We all have different challenges and starting points when it comes to personal finance. But if you look hard enough, I guarantee you can find examples of people in similar circumstances that have overcome their challenges. They may be the exception rather than the rule, but they are also showing you what's possible. These kinds of examples can be really impactful on your mindset because in order to achieve any goal, you first need to believe that it's possible. And that's another episode and weekend of Optimal Finance Daily in the books. Thank you for your support and for listening every day. I'll be back with more posts for you on Monday. So have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll catch you tomorrow where your optimal life awaits.